Hi everybody, my name is Stokes from Intranet and welcome to my session. Today I'm going to spend some time showing you how to connect a Microsoft Power App to Microsoft Flow. In this example, I will create a very basic support ticket mobile application with data stored in SharePoint, and then we want to use Microsoft Flow to decide who the ticket should be assigned to. The Flow will look at how many tickets the agent already has assigned to them and assign the new ticket to the agent with the fewest number. First thing we need to do is create the SharePoint list. Okay, so let's go to our intranet page to start with and into the support center. This is where we want to manage our support. We can go and create a new list and we'll call this support tickets. Because we're a good SharePoint citizen, we won't use spaces. So we just want to add some columns now to our list. First thing we'll do is add a number column. And we'll make this our priority. We want to make this a number between 1 and 4, and we don't want any decimal places. And we'll set the default to 4 as well. Yes, it's required. Next we can create a description field. This will be multiple lines of text. And we'll allow the agent to put in rich HTML. And again, it's required. Now we want to have a person that we can assign the ticket to. This is the field that we're going to fill out from the flow. And we'll add a space in. And we can add a due date. So all of our tickets should be closed within a certain SLA, so we can figure out what the due date should be. That's not required because maybe that needs to be set later. And then lastly, we want to have a close date because we want to track the date the ticket's actually closed. And just tidy up the column names. Making your list pretty is important. So what we can do is just add a couple of items in here. We just want to see the list so we've got things we can see in the Power App. So we'll just create issue 1, priority 4, assign it to me, and set a due date. We'll just add a couple more. We'll add one to Curtis. And one to Sean. So basically what we're doing here, we're loading up the list. We want to put some tickets in and we want to make sure that one person has less than others. So the flow can actually find out who to assign it to. The nice thing we're using Flow is going forward we'll be able to add more complexity in. If all users have the same level of tickets, then we need to pick out who should have it. We might also want to do some complex calculations, such as if somebody has priority 1 tickets, then they have less capacity to take on priority 4 tickets. So this is where Flow really comes in useful, because we can actually make it quite complex. Now that we have that in place, we can go on to create the Power App. Okay, so we go into our Power App, and what we're going to do is just create a new app from scratch. So we're going to choose a SharePoint source. Try and find it in our recent list. No, it's not there. So paste it in. And we want to choose our support tickets list. So PowerApps will go and actually create us an app out of the box. And the nice thing with this is going to create us a basic app where we can just have a display gallery, an edit form, and a details form. So straight away we have a fully working app. It's really, really cool. I like this that PowerApps can do that. We're just going to tidy up the gallery a bit so it just shows a little more meaningful information. So we want to show the issue title first. We then want to show the person it's assigned to. We don't want to see the claims, so we'll just change that to display name. And then we probably want to show the priority underneath. We could obviously customize this to show more details, maybe a summary of the issue, whatever else we want to see there. We can see here the detail screen, so when we click into it we get basic details. It's not very good, so we might want to update it, but we can actually go in and create a new item now as well, and we can see in the assigned to we have the ability to choose people. Remember, all this out of the box, I just created all of this app here with one click. Super easy. So if we create a new item, we just go and create a new issue 5, set the priority, give it a description, and we can choose who we want to assign it to. In this case, I'll assign it to myself. And we'll set a due date. Save that, and we can see straight away that we actually have 2 issue 5s. But we've created a new item from the app, and that's gone and saved it in SharePoint as well, which is fantastic. Okay, now we're ready to create the flow. We can put all kinds of magic in here. To start with, we'll keep the flow very simple just to get the connectivity working, but later on we can come back and add some more advanced features. So we'll go into our flow page and we want to create a new flow. I like to create flows from blank. I like to pick my trigger and my actions because I figure I know what I'm doing. So the first thing we want to do is choose the PowerApps option, and we'll set the trigger from PowerApps. There's no other inputs that we need to put in here. And the second thing we need to do is plan our exit, so we want to respond back to PowerApps because that's the last thing we're going to do. Essentially, receive a request from PowerApps and send something back. In this case, we're going to send back an email address. I'm just going to hard code it for now because what we're interested in to start with is the ability to just prove that it works, and then we can extend the logic in PowerApps in Flow later on. At this point, I am actually going to create a SharePoint connection. I'm going to do this because there's a small bug in Flow at the moment, which hopefully gets resolved, where if you attach your Flow to your Power App and then you go back into Flow and add a new connector, such as to SharePoint, it doesn't pick the new connection up. So you have to go back and remove the Flow from the Power App and re-add it. So I'm just going to add in the connections that I want, or I think I'm going to want straight away. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to load some items in. But at least it's there ready. It just saves me a little bit of pain later on. Don't worry though, the product group is aware of this, and I will certainly hope there'll be a fix at some point in the future. So I'm just going to type in the name of my SharePoint site that I want to load my support tickets from. The reason I'm going to load SharePoint items in here is I need to get a list of all the support tickets that are currently open, because then I can scroll through them and figure out how many tickets each agent has. I also very much recommend that you rename your actions as you go. Once you get lots of actions in and lots of apply to eaches, it can get very, very confusing as to which actions do what. So the better you name your items early on, the easier life's going to be. I also like to give them a good name as well. I like to start the name with the application that it relates to, and then give a description of what the function is. So support tickets, get next assigned to user. Now that we have our flow ready, we can go back to our Power App and associate the flow to it. So now that we've got the flow ready, we can go into PowerApps. If we go on to one of our edit screen, then we can see on the action menu we have the option there for flows. If we click flow, then lo and behold, we can automatically see the flow that we just created. And that's going to add the association to our Power App. It automatically puts in the code to run it on the onVisible. In this case, I actually do want to run it in the onVisible action, because straight away we want to find out who has the next availability. So the format we have is we have this short name support tickets -get next assigned to the user. So that's the name of the flow without any spaces. .run, and then when we put .run, we have the ability to pass parameters to it. We don't have any parameters set up at the moment, so we don't need to worry about that too much. But what we need to be thinking about is when we run our flow, we need some way to actually get the result of the flow. So it's one thing to set it running. In this case, what we want to do is we're going to update a context item. We're going to call the context item, we'll call it assigned to. So that's going to return all of the return variables. So in this case, we're going to have the ability to run something called assigned to.email, because that's the property we created. So you could call that flow response or assigned to details, whatever you want to, but I'm going to call my context item assigned to. So in here I'll be able to access assigned to.email. So now when we go to our screen, you can see those little dots across the top. That means something's happening in the background, and that means our flow is actually running. What we want to do now is just make sure that the flow is actually running in the background. So if we go back into our flow, we can click back, and we can see our run history. Our run history shows that a flow ran 19 seconds ago, and look, it was successful. So we've had an input, we didn't pass any properties in, we've got some SharePoint items, we can see that they've been returned into it, and we also are returning an email object back to PowerApps. So as far as I can tell, that looks pretty good. So at this point then, we believe we've returned something from PowerApps, but we don't really have any way of seeing it. So what I'm going to do is just add a little label to my Power App. This is the easiest way for me to just check what's coming back. I like to do things with as little complexity as possible to start with, and then add complexity each time. So I'm just going to do a label for assigned to .email. Oops, just getting my fingers all confused there. So assigned to .email, so that's the property that's coming back. And now we can see straight away it's showing mark.stokes, so this is atolo.com, and lo and behold, that is the email address that our PowerApps returned. To be fair, that's really all there is to it. We've called the flow from our Power App and returned some results to it. But since we've got some time left, we can go and add some advanced features. The first thing we're going to do is send some properties to the flow so we can do some filtering if we want to. So to do this, what we're going to do is go into our flow, and we're going to add a couple of compose options in here. I like to use compose at this point. I use compose where the item's not going to change. Of course, we could use a variable if we preferred. So to make it easier to use throughout the flow, then we want to change the name straight away. So I'll just call this input1. And then I want to use an asking PowerApps option in dynamic variable in there. And we'll create a second one. We can call this input2. Of course, you could call this anything meaningful for your application. Another asking PowerApps, and you can see it automatically generates new dynamic variables for you. Suppose we can do an input3, and we could just keep doing this as long as we want, depending on what we need to pass in. Just keep saying asking PowerApps, and it automatically creates the required items. So that's our flow now prepared to accept our inputs. And now we can switch back to our Power App. And what we need to do is, at this point I just remove the previous reference to the flow and re-add it. I sometimes find it doesn't always update very quickly to the new options, so if I just remove it and re-add it, that can help out. And it obviously changes the onVisible command, so it's got rid of what we had in there before, which is nice and helpful, thank you. and now I can put my inputs in. Unfortunately, at this point, there's a little bug in this connection. So because I've done this once or twice in my demo environment, it's actually retained 3 inputs called compose inputs. These are not going to be used anywhere. These are just hanging around from a previous attachment. There's a little bug in the connection, which hopefully the product group will fix at some point. But I can basically go through, add in my inputs here, so input value 1, input value 2, and input value 3. So this matches what I had in my flow. And if I add these in, then these values will get passed into the flow. And I'll just recreate the update context part of it as well, just so we've got that there. Now obviously I'm just hard coding the input values here, but we could just pass these in from other properties on the PowerApps form if we wanted to. It's just string values from either typed in directly or from our form. And that's all we need to do to pass properties into Flow. Save PowerApps. And then we'll click off the screen, click on again so we can run the on visible. We see the 3 dots going, so something's happened in the background. And if we switch over to our flow and we look at the previous run, then we can go in and look at our inputs and we can see input value 1, input value 2, and input value 3. So now we can use these input values in our flow to do all kinds of things. So in a similar vein, what we're going to do is now send multiple properties back from Flow into PowerApps. Because sometimes we may not just want to return one value, maybe we want to return a number of different options. So we've already got a text value in there for email. We're going to add another one in, and this will be a yes, no field, and we'll just call it did it work. I'm putting spaces in as well in the property name. I'll just put yes. Output, we can add return an email. So there's another option here to return an email. Now, to be perfectly honest, at the moment, this just looks like a string that comes back to me, so I can't really distinguish the difference. Maybe someone can correct me here. And we can put in a number as well, so we can return a number back. So we have some data type in here if we want to. So we'll return a max value, let's say 5. And we do also have an option in here to return a file. I'm not going to demonstrate this here. It won't work particularly well for the setup I've got, but it's something you can look at if you want to. So if you're returning a file from a SharePoint list, you can return it into PowerApps for the user, that kind of thing. I won't be able to demonstrate here. So that's as simple as that. Save the flow. Now we can go back to our PowerApp. And what we want to do at this point is to add in some extra labels so we can view the results of the return values. So I'll add a new label to the canvas. Make sure we can see it. And the same way I can just call assigned to, which is our return value. And at the moment, see, we only see email at the moment, so it's not actually updated with our new return values. So what we're going to need to do is go into our action menu, click flows. We're just going to need to remove this flow reference from the screen, and we need to re-add it. Unfortunately, that automatically overwrites my onVisible again, so you might want to copy and paste this value before you do it. I'm just going to rebuild it. It's still got those compose inputs hanging around. So we'll just ignore them for now and pretend they don't exist. Put my input value 1. Input value 2. One of the hardest things in life is to type when somebody's watching you. And there we go. So just build up our, that's the wrong place. And just build up our update context again so we can have our return value back into that context variable. Give it the same name so our current references work. Okay, so exactly the same as it was before. Quick save. So we just need to click off the screen again and back on again, just so it can run, so we can actually get those return values. So we've got our email option, and now we can see that we've got our other properties showing up in the visual workspace. So did it work? Yes, let's just return my yes value. Put a new label on. And I have my email 2 here, so again it just looks like a string. I haven't managed to figure out what the difference is. Another label. And this time we could do assign to dot. And max value, this is our number value that's come back. So we just do our number value and it renders out just as a string in the label again. And lastly, we have our last one, which is our file. Obviously, because it's a file type, it's not going to show up here, so I'll let you work on that afterwards as a demonstration. I could probably pass it straight into my attachment option here, but it doesn't work in this example. So that's how we can get multiple values back from Flow into our Power App. So there we have it. I think we've achieved what we set out to achieve. We've shown how we can integrate PowerApps and Flow into the same application. What we did is we went out and created a SharePoint list, and that held the information of our support tickets. Then we created a Power App. We just used the most basic Power App, but it's nice to see just how easy it is to create those applications, and the fact that when you create it from a data source in the first place, Microsoft gives you the ability to just have a fully working app straight out of the box. Makes it very easy for beginners and new users to actually get something that's usable. Then we went off and created the Flow. So the Flow allowed us to do some processing, get some items from SharePoint, figure out who the right person should be, and send that value back. Then we extended that by going and sending multiple properties into Flow. And that's really useful because quite often the Flow needs some input to be able to make some decisions. So by sending those properties in, we can filter information, we can target different lists. There's a whole bunch of things that lets us do. That's really, really important. We've also gone and seen how we can send multiple values back. Sometimes it's not just one value, but maybe we need to send a lot of different properties. So we can really easily do a lot of computation in the Flow and send that back to the Power App to do something with. The nice thing is that it works in a very timely manner. We actually have a number of Power Apps out there for customers at the moment, and we do exactly this. For example, we have a request process, and we need to figure out if some teams have a capacity to take additional requests. Otherwise, the request isn't allowed to be made in the first place. This really cuts down a lot of the approval process. So the Flow can be triggered by choosing a date. That runs in the background, checks some SharePoint list, does some counts, and sends back whether that's an approved request or not. You do have some concerns here about whether the Flow will run fast enough or quick enough for the Power App to receive, and whether that affects user perception or user experience or not. In our experience, it's actually been working pretty good. We've not had any problems with flows taking a while to trigger or taking a while to process. Now, if your flows are too complex and you have a lot of apply to each items in there, then it may not be great for the user experience. So you need to be really, really careful about what you're actually doing in that flow. It's got to be back as quick as possible. So just bear that in mind when you're creating it. There are a couple of little bugs I found along the way as we're doing this. The first one, as I mentioned, if you create your flow and then you attach it to your Power App, and then you go and add some extra connectors into your flow, you can have some issues. It might not actually run those connectors, but what you can do, if you just save your flow with a different name, so use the Save As feature, delete your original flow, enable the new flow, and then connect that to PowerApps, then it'll carry on working. This is a known bug, and the product team is aware of it, but just be aware of it if you come across it. I spent a good few hours trying to figure that one out before talking to the product group directly, so be aware of that. And also, as you saw, sometimes if you want to update the return properties, you might need to remove the app reference, the flow reference from the Power App and re-add it. And just be aware again that it might actually overwrite the calls to flow that you have. So a couple of little gotchas. They're not really big. Once you know what they are, they're quite easy to work around. For me, I think it's a really powerful solution. It gives me a lot of capability that I wouldn't really want to put in my Power App, so it lets me leverage some of that out. So I think it's definitely worthwhile. So I hope this was useful. I hope you got a lot out of it, and if you have any questions, I'll be delighted to take them. Thank you very much.